In the name of Deputy Thomas P. Broughan.
Thanks, Cahill. Well, Minister, it looks at present, I suppose, that we're facing a kind of a triple whammy from, obviously we discussed Brexit before and the impacts it could have on revenue and expenditure, and I discussed, I think, quantitative easing, which looks like it's going to taper off in 2017 with your colleague, with Minister Noonan, and the third whammy, if you like, I suppose, is the new Trump presidency. A lot of us still can't understand how I suppose, a federation, such a close federation as the United States, how you can overwhelmingly win the popular vote and still not become president. But we're faced with President Trump, and I just wonder, from the indications we've had in the very often confused and rambling pronouncements of the President-elect during the campaign, are we right to be worried, and are you taking any steps to see how this might impact on our expenditure?
Thank you, Deputy. While it would not be practice to prepare contingency plans for a range of election outcomes in other jurisdictions, the government, its officials and our embassy in Washington were monitoring closely developments regarding the US presidential election, and were ready to engage with the new US administration regardless of the outcome. It would be premature to anticipate or comment at this early stage on President-elect Trump's specific policy priorities or on our potential responses to them. We are, however, acutely conscious of the particular responsibility for the United States for leadership and engagement across the globe in our endeavours to address shared challenges. The Government will continue to work constructively and productively to ensure that our bilateral relations with the US will continue to prosper during the next 4 years, and we look forward to working closely with the new administration in the White House. In the meantime, the Government will continue to engage actively with the administration of President Obama until he completes his term on the 20th of January. As regards Brexit, the Government has robust arrangements in place to address the challenges it poses. The Taoiseach is chairing a Cabinet Committee, of which I am a member, and is overseeing a whole-of-government response, including both the economic impact and the negotiations at the EU level and with administrations in London and Belfast. Work is underway across all government departments on the key strategic, policy and operational issues. The government spending plans outlined in Budget 2017 support planning to meet key challenges, including Brexit. They provide measures to underpin our international competitiveness, to strengthen our medium-term economic potential, to underpin the achievement of societal and social objectives, and to support the effective functioning of our economy. They are prudent, they are financially responsible, and they do provide, I believe, a secure basis for the planning of future economic growth in our country on a sustainable way.
Thanks, Cahill. Well, can I just ask you, first of all, Minister, have you received any specific requests from colleagues in the Cabinet for additional funding for next year, and particularly perhaps the Department of Jobs, in relation, obviously we depend so much on foreign direct investment with Microsoft, Dell, Intel, Apple, Google, all the key IT companies, well, certainly very often European headquarters and African, Asian headquarters based in our city and country. Have you and given the pronouncements of the President-elect that he may slash their corporation tax from 35% to 15%, if there are any serious and grave concerns of how we might meet that challenge. The other characteristic that we've gleaned from the bruising campaign, as President-elect Trump calls it, is that he's very hostile to trade agreements, that he's immediately going to scrap the Trans-Pacific Agreement, that he's hostile to NAFTA, he's hostile to TTIPs, and we're a small open economy, which depends on trade. And again, is there an indication that Minister Flanagan and his staff will need greater resources in order to meet the challenges there? Thanks, Cahill.
Thank you. In relation to each of your questions, Deputy, have I received any additional requests for investment to respond back to Brexit or the threats that you're proposing? Not since the budget, but the budget is only a number of weeks ago, and I do receive a constant number of proposals for additional expenditure. So I would expect across early next year there will be further claims and demands, both within government and elsewhere, to look at how we can respond back to the challenges. But I do believe that in the budget that we have and inside the spending plans that we have for next year, we have very solid and strong plans to respond back to the threats that you have referred to. In relation to trade agreements, I think you raise a very important point, because Ireland has built a lot of our recent prosperity on ordered trade agreements with other countries, and the single market, of course, is the best example of that. And I think myself this is going to be one of the greatest areas of challenge in the future. Have additional requests for funding come in since budget day in relation to that area? The answer to that question is no, Deputy Broughan. But I do believe in the coming years this is going to be a big area of focus. And of course it's for that reason that I believe it's so important that all of this House does unite behind Ireland's continued membership of the single market in particular.
Deputy Broughan.
Have you? I know that you mentioned the committee, the committee on Brexit, and preparing for maybe the other challenges to the economy. I know the Taoiseach's been in contact, and perhaps one or two other people, but has there been any contact in the context of Irish business in relation to the incumbent presidency, and in relation to tax expenditures for next year? Have you carried out any? We just passed the finance bill, and I saw you there valiantly battling to the end, Cathaoirleach, at 3 a.m, wasn't it, last night? And I know other colleagues here were here as well with us. A pretty full house, actually. I didn't notice any of our media colleagues, did you? Any of our journalist colleagues present on those important debates?
They're very tired.
Well, yeah. But,
continue, Deputy.
We were here, but what I wanted to just ask you, on the tax expenditure side, and you'll be reporting to the Budget Oversight Committee. Given, just specifically the Trump presidency, is that something you need to look at again? Because last night we did sanction in that bill further tax expenditures, further funding that you could have had to run the state expenditure, which you now won't have.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you.
Not a final reply.
We've already made an adjustment in relation to expected economic growth for next year of 0.5% of national income. In other words, it's been reduced by that amount, and that has been built into our expectations regarding how much revenue will be available to spend and into our tax plans. We are not proposing any further change to that at the moment, Deputy. Our colleagues from the media are always with us. And I'm sure they'll be commenting on your own words in a moment to go.
Thank you, Minister. Question number 9, we're not present. Question number 10, in the name of Deputy Thomas P. Broughan again. Deputy Broughan.
Cathaoirleach, well, I know you've had a lengthy discussion there earlier on with other colleagues in relation to Lansdowne Road, but I think it's often perceived now that the agreement itself is effectively in tatters because of some of the actions of the government over recent months. The fact that you seem to have used up a huge portion, if you like, of the available space that you had in relation to some of the earlier public sector disputes. So what I'm asking you specifically, I've asked you if we're going to fairly address the concerns. Will we expect to see then early in 2017 serious discussions and negotiations to restore the pay and conditions of public sector workers?
Well, I've already outlined, Deputy, the plans that we have in relation to the aftermath of the Lansdowne Road Agreement. They briefly are to allow space for the Public Service Pay Commission to conduct its work, and in the aftermath of that to have discussions and negotiations in relation to what will happen after the Lansdowne Road Agreement. That continues to be the case. But just to pick up on one phrase that you used there, when you alleged that the Lansdowne Road Agreement was in, to use your phrase, in tatters due to actions by government. I mean, what actions are you referring to, Deputy? The agreement that we made with the INTO and TUI was inside the Lansdowne Road Agreement, recognised as being inside the Lansdowne Road Agreement. If you're referring to the issues that have developed in the aftermath of the proposed settlement of An Garda Síochána, do you believe they should have access to the Labour Court and WRC? And if you do believe they should have access to the Labour Court and WRC, which are independent bodies from government, Do you believe we should ever be at a point where government would not accept their recommendations and thereby undermine their work for the entire economy in the future?
Well, I think your key responsibility, obviously, is to restore the living standards of all public servants. I note already, well, you mentioned the Garda deal. I'm not sure what the final figure on that is. Some people say 50 million, is it, of that sort of set aside, the little money you had in the kitty for us. That's the overall cost there. But, you know, I think there is, obviously, the Congress of Trade Unions, SIPTU, have you know, made requests that serious negotiations begin on the post you know, Lansdowne Road organisation of pay and conditions for the public sector. I did welcome, by the way, the Public Service Pay Commission and its appointment, and I've asked you, I mean, I think we've heard quite a few people, I know Deputy Sherlock and others, talking in terms again of having an employer-labour conference across the whole range of the economy, not just public service, but on a broader sense. Would you agree, for example, I mean, I think Fine Gael has had a fairly brutal record in relation to social partnership in the past, and that you know, you just haven't created the kind of connections which are necessary to try and get us all moving forward together. I mean, I don't think anybody denies that restoration is necessary of paying conditions to the, you know, the pre-2011 or pre-2009 disaster, and you clearly have the key responsibility now to try and carry on the work of your predecessors.
Thank you, but you didn't answer the question I put to you. I put the question to you, and I think it's an important question to tease out. For people that are critical of where the government is now, and of course they're entitled to be, includes people here within the House, were they in favour of An Garda Síochána having access to the Labour Court? And if they are in favour of it, do you believe an employer should not accept their recommendations? And that is the position the government found itself in. And, but it has created consequences for those who work in our public services, Deputy, which I acknowledge to you, and I've already done so publicly. And that is the reason why I am now engaging with the Irish Congress of Trade Unions in relation to the aftermath of that recommendation, in relation to your two particular questions that you put to me, in relation to a Labour employer forum. We actually did have an initial meeting of such body there a number of weeks ago. It was in the immediate run-up to the budget and didn't perhaps get the profile that is merited.
Thank you, Minister.
And I do believe a mechanism like that will be of help in the future. As to social partnership, Deputy, at times it had a pretty bad track record itself. And that's something my party was critical of, and I think our criticisms have been acknowledged as being correct at times. But I do believe that how we engage with all elements of our society in a collective approach in relation to public pay is a necessity in relation to how we deal with the issues that you raised with me earlier on, such as Brexit.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Broughan, very quickly.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do believe all public servants should have access to the industrial relations machinery of the state. That's, I think, it's a sine qua non, and I agree with you on that. But I think it was your responsibility, I think, to bring all elements of the public service. Can I say, by the way, because we referred to last night the great support that our staff in this House gave us in relation to carrying out our duties on the finance bill, which we're deeply appreciative of. But can I just ask you, have you given any thought, or is your department sketching out any, or looking at any kind of a sketch of what the post-Lansdowne Road landscape would look like? In other words, I think we know we do need restoration. Living costs in this country, are we the 5th or 6th highest living costs in Europe? The public service, while there is job stability, job security, there is also, you know, you're also certainly not going to make a fortune. So have you given any thought to that?
Deputy, we have given a huge amount of thought to it, and it's a matter that I'm actively engaging in myself at the moment. And the reason for that is because the figures in relation to all of this and the impact that they will have on the state are exceptionally large. I mean, you refer, Deputy, there to restoration. If you equate restoration to equaling the earnings that are not available due to the presence of FEMPI legislation, that's €1.4 billion per year. And how the state responds back to that is an exceptional challenge. And that's why I and the Programme for Partnership Government has made clear that the only way we can respond back to that is in an orderly way, Deputy, and in an affordable way for everybody. And I am committed to doing that, Deputy. That is why I believe the Public Service Pay Commission will be able to provide a very, very important input into that work.
Thank you,
because the consequences of it for other things that you want to see happen are so large. And Deputy, may I just briefly conclude by saying you sent me an excellent budget submission, very lengthy. I didn't agree with everything that was in it, Deputy, but you put an awful lot of focus into putting together in it. And in that budget submission that you put in, you made reference to all of the different things you would like to see happen. And Deputy, all that has to come from a single fund, and that's why how we manage future wages in our country in the future are so important.
Thank you, Minister. Question number 11, in the name of Deputy Brendan Smith, deputised for Deputy Cleary.
No, we dealt with it earlier.
Oh yes, that's okay. It's the same question, okay. And number 12, in the name of Thomas P. Broughan again. You must have won the lottery this week.
I just thank the Minister for his comments. I tried to balance the budget, as you know. In fact, I gave you a surplus of about $4 billion, I think. Well, I hope there wasn't. but I balanced the books anyway. I just asked the Minister in relation to the work that's ongoing in relation to CFRAM, the CFRAM programme, which started in 2011. I've been at some of the consultation process for Dublin Bay North. We've had a problem, Minister, with a number of rivers. I think I mentioned specifically there the Wad. I could have mentioned the Nanakan as well. The River Santi or the River Ahini, some people call it the Moyne, and of course from the ocean itself, from flooding from the sea, from Dublin Bay at Clontarf. So I just asked for an update on what the Minister is doing about those areas. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Deputy. The core strategy for addressing areas at potentially significant risk from flooding is the OPW's Catchment Flood Risk Assessment and Management Programme, CFRAM. 300 locations nationwide have been assessed under the programme, which has been undertaken by engineering consultants on behalf of the OPW, working in partnership with the local authorities. The CFRAM programme is being completed through 6 study areas, including the Eastern Catchment Flood Risk Assessment and Management Study. The CFRAM programme is the biggest flood risk planning exercise ever undertaken by the state. A national public consultation on the draft flood maps ended on the 23rd of December 2013. The programme also involves the development of preliminary flood risk management options and flood risk management plans. The statutory public consultation for the draft flood risk management plans for the Eastern CFRAM will close on the 2nd of December, and the comments received will inform the finalisation of the plans in spring of 2017. The plan includes a prioritised list of feasible measures, both structural and non-structural.
Thank you, Minister.
Well, I think the worst thing can happen to I think any individual or family is to have one of the worst things to have your house flooded, and those of us who are fortunate that it hasn't happened to us, we're deeply sympathetic. I think looking at people, I heard yourself, I think Minister and Deputy Moran, talking about your plans in the Midlands and along the Shannon, and I commend you warmly for that and for bringing forward this 100 million, because what people went through over the years, a couple of bad years there, 2011, 2014 and so on, was totally intolerable. And just specifically, obviously you'll be getting in the Howth area, as you know, Baldoyle in my constituency is a polder below sea level, and some of the adjoining areas, because of the topography, I think there is a move to bring in flood relief for that area, and it's something I hope you'll be supportive of. Likewise, the Nanakan River and the Wad, which runs through Artane and Donecarney in my own constituency, which flooded badly, I think, in 2014. 2017. Also the River Moyne, the Main as we call it, a long history of flooding, and some works were carried out by previous governments on that. And finally, of course, you've been moving on Clontarf. But you might think an urban constituency has such an interest in flood relief, but we do. And I do want to warmly commend yourself, and as I've heard Deputy Moran as well, speaking at great length and precision on this problem.
Very good.
Thank you very much for the kind comments, and I suppose this is a whole of government approach. It's not just myself in the Office of Public Works, but I must commend the entire government for the approach we're taking to flooding. The investment is there. Has been laid out, and I think that there are some minor work schemes which the Deputy may or may not be aware of, which have been carried out and which will continue to carry out as well in areas, maybe small works that can be taken place in areas to get instant relief. And I would suggest that whether it's urban or rural, where there is flooding and where people are suffering, is treated the same. And hopefully, when the CFRAM process is now complete here, we will be starting in early next year with the rural CFRAM, if one might call it that, for the rural areas, because the CFRAM, as we have done it, is concentrating on areas of population and where there is the most risk to properties, and we have identified 300 areas there. Thank you again.
Okay. Next question.